Hello and welcome to another episode of Our Story, 250 Years of the United States of America. If you're new here, welcome aboard. This daily show goes year by year through all 250 years of American history to tell a linear story of our country. This week is going to bring with it lots of changes to the territories and states in the country. We're going to look into the most famous bear attack in American history. And there's the first contingent presidential election in 25 years. Today, we'll be looking into the founding of the Saturday Evening Post, the passing of one of the remaining signers of the Declaration of Independence, and we'll wrap up what we've been discussing with Missouri pursuing statehood. Introductions out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the episode. Welcome to 1821 in America. It's New Year's Day in the United States of America, and the New England Journal of Medicine publishes an interesting analysis about the administration of a common medicine, which reads, as the prussic or hydrocyanic acid is now getting into extensive use in this part of the country, I beg leave to state some observations I had occasion to make in regard to its unfavorable operation. The dose usually administered, I believe, is from 6 to 12 drops. I have begun with 4 drops and never increased the dose beyond 10, given twice or 3 times a day. The second case in which I employed it was that of a young lady, considerably advanced in pulmonary consumption. She began with 5 drops, and in the course of a week had increased the dose to 7 drops twice a day. When she had thus taken it 2 or 3 times, she was soon after taking a dose seized with a loss of sense and of motion, and appeared to those around to be expiring. In an hour after, when I saw her, she continued insensible and cold, but recovered in 8 or 10 hours. The weakness produced did not subside for a number of days. At the time this accident occurred, I was not disposed to attribute it to the medicine, but as the patient had no subsequent attack of the same character during the remainder of her complaint and took no more of the medicine, I ultimately concluded that these symptoms had been caused by the prussic acid. We now know, of course, that there's essentially no good that can come from taking hydrogen cyanide. It's a systematic poison that works by inhibiting cytochrome oxidase, essentially preventing the body from absorbing oxygen, and exposure such as this is known to cause gasping for air, irregular heartbeats, critically low blood pressure, unconsciousness, seizures, and rapid death. Medicine sure has come a long way. Alright, now in the beginning of March, James Monroe and Daniel D. Tompkins begin their second terms as President and Vice President of the United States respectively, and in an interesting quirk, as this is the first time that March 4th falls on a Sunday, Monroe actually opts to wait for a Monday and is sworn in on the 5th, technically after his first term expired, though in practice it's not like you can really claim America didn't have a president for a day as he's continuing to hold the office. I am curious though what the case would have been if this happened during a transition of power. In mid-July, the United States formally takes possession of its newly bought territory of Florida from Spain as part of the Adams-Onis Treaty. Both East and West Florida were ceded to the United States, and the event is marked by 2 flag ceremonies, the first of which takes place at Castillo de San Marcos in St. Augustine on July 10th, which, as a side note, is still the oldest stone fort in the United States and open to the public, and the second of these flag ceremonies takes place in Pensacola just 7 days later. Now, the population of this new territory is relatively small, although settlement is set to increase significantly as the United States will soon incentivize settlement through the use of land grants. Now, the reason I've opted to put the Saturday Evening Post on today's cover is that it's a highly influential magazine that is first published in this year as a weekly newspaper, though unfortunately it seems the first issue is lost as no copies are, from what I can tell, preserved in any archival collections. The paper actually traces its origins back a bit further than this year, however, as according to the magazine itself, it all began with Ben Franklin. In 1728, 22-year-old Benjamin Franklin came up with an idea for an informative magazine for the colonies. It would be titled the Pennsylvania Gazette. Before he could begin production, though, the name and idea were stolen by an unscrupulous partner. The partner began publishing the magazine, but within the first year, failed. Franklin and another partner took over production. The Gazette carried news and contributions on various topics from readers. Many articles were written by Franklin himself. The paper reflected his interests in the world, science, and government. It also reflected his politics. Franklin had a good sense of what people wanted to read, which allowed him to make the Gazette the most popular publication in the American colonies. In 1748, Franklin, satisfied with the fortune he'd made from his businesses and inventions, retired from his many enterprises to pursue scientific research and public projects. The Gazette continued publishing, outliving Franklin by 10 years. It ceased publication in 1800, but Franklin's old print shop remained in business at number 53 Market Street, Philadelphia, 4 doors down from 2nd Street. The concept of the Saturday Evening Post didn't originate with the print shop's owner, Samuel Atkinson. It came from Charles Alexander, who had the idea of printing a popular poem about a blind girl in the city who set type by hand. Once Alexander had gathered a list of 200 subscribers to the poem, he suggested that Atkinson use the opportunity to start a newspaper. Atkinson agreed. The new publication would be called the Saturday Evening Post because it would be printed in time to be delivered to Philadelphia addresses in the second mail delivery on Saturdays. Pressmen often have to work the hand-operated press through Friday night to complete an edition on time. In these early days, the Post's press room takes up the lower floor. Editors and typesetters work on the second floor, and the office of the editor is in the attic. In early history claims the Post's first issue appears on August 4th of this year, and this coincides with the earliest issue of the Post now held in archives, which is identified as number 9 and is published on September 29th of this year. In addition to local news, early issues carry news of national events like the correspondence between ex-presidents John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, and follows international news, reporting on the death of Napoleon, for example. Not only does Atkinson use Ben Franklin's old printing press, he also uses his style. The Post's contents are written with a tone that is pragmatic, open-minded but skeptical, and moral, though with a sense of humor. It covers a bit of everything about America: business, law, exploration, fashion, etiquette, agriculture, and science. And the Post doesn't operate with a large staff of journalists and researchers. It relies on other newspapers for much of its content, and it expects that its own content will also be freely used by other publications. So, as this year is a bit lighter on other national events, I've opted to look through that first available issue from this year and provide some flavor of what an 1821 article sounds like. Under the header Fire at Halifax, 23 houses were destroyed by fire at Halifax, Nova Scotia on the morning of the 17th instant. It originated in a bakehouse opposite the chocolate manufactory and was confined to the block adjoining. The Halifax paper says, we feel it our duty to state, and we do it with shame and sorrow, that numbers of the inhabitants stood by indifferent spectators of the havoc which was around them, and every attempt was unavailing to induce them to act like men. Under the header Russia and Turkey, on the subject of the late foreign intelligence relating to the affairs of Russia and Turkey, the Boston Sentinel remarks, "It is now certain that 9/10 of the late reports of transactions between Turkey and Russia, which have been circulated with so much avidity and read with so much interest, were mere fabrications of stock jobbers and newsmongers. They were excited by the melancholy events which had occurred in Turkey, and by the quarrel which had taken place between the high-spirited Russian minister and the insidious Turkish vizier on account of the detention of Russian vessels by the Turks." Under the header Mail Robber, Birdsey in Norton has been sentenced to imprisonment in the penitentiary for 3 months by the U.S. Circuit Court at Columbus, Ohio, for robbing the mail several times in Hudson, Portage County, while employed as assistant postmaster. He pled guilty, and the court exercised lenity in consequence of his submissive and penitent conduct. In an article with no heading, the paper reads, "The Providence Gazette states that a man has lately been convicted at the municipal court in Boston for the crime of adultery. He had left his wife and family and taken up lodgings with a pretended apprentice of his who, it appeared, upon investigation, was a female in disguise, whom this abandoned wretch had seduced, but who has since been thankfully restored to the society of her friends." Under the header Singular Death, a man by the name of Martin Foland of the town of Middleburg, New York, lately strangled to death attempting to swallow a sea fish of the dimensions of 2 inches in width and 5 inches in length. He has left a wife and family. In what I assume is a wag rather than a legitimate statement of fact, under the header Unison of Sentiment, "I wish I had never married you," said Mrs. L. to her husband. "I wish, my dear, you never had," said Mr. L. to his wife. In the moral and religious section of the paper, it is written, "The life of a Christian is a life of spirituality. To be carnally minded, saith the apostle, is death. To be spiritually minded is life and peace. And if ye live after the flesh, ye shall die. But if ye through the Spirit mortify the deeds of the body, ye shall live. And they that are Christ's have crucified the flesh with the affections and lusts, for ye are dead, and your life is hid with Christ in God. It is only faithful souls who know how straight is the path of spirituality, and of how great consequence is the least indulgence of the flesh. It is the expression of a great man, as a very little dust will disorder a clock, and a grain of sand will obscure the sight, so the least forbidden indulgence will hinder the right motion of the heart towards God." And in a write-up without a header, the following is announced. It is probable that George IV will be married again in the course of a few months. He will meet with no difficulty in finding a suitable bride. Germany is fertile in princesses, and there will be parents enough ready to offer their daughters, perhaps willing victims, at the shrine of ambition. The Emperor of Austria has still a daughter unmarried, as well as the King of Saxony. The King of Bavaria has 6, 2 of whom at least are of marriageable age. The King of Prussia has one as old as 18 years. The King of Portugal one who is 20 years old. The King of Sardinia one who is 18 years old. The King of Denmark one who is 28 years old. The Grand Duke of Tuscany, 2 who are marriageable, and besides these there is the widow of the infant Prince Charles of Spain, the widow of Duke de Berry, and the widow of Napoleon Bonaparte. Alright, so hopefully you enjoyed getting a little bit of a taste for these old news clippings. It's stuff like that for me really brings the past to life, because you can imagine, now 205 years ago, someone sitting down and reading that paper, fascinated by these stories both local and distant, and chuckling to themselves with the wry sense of humor. On the 4th of August, William Floyd, a signer of the Declaration, passes away. He was born in 1734 in New York, and his father died when the young Floyd was only 17, leaving him a large estate. He managed it well, learning how to make profits from both the tenants on the property and the produce and animals grown on it, and soon became an excellent farmer and manager. As the property fronted the Atlantic Ocean, Floyd also had a shipping dock used for trade and access to fishing, oysters, and a variety of seafood. His personal accounts tell us that he dealt widely with carpenters, brickmasons, farriers, butchers, and a variety of tradesmen. Floyd developed excellent connections with prominent people and became increasingly prominent himself in the politics of eastern Long Island. Like so many of his neighbors, Floyd had strong ties to Connecticut, as it was easier to reach that neighboring colony than it was to travel into New York City. Floyd's father had lent money to Connecticut Governor Jonathan Trumbull, and the Floyd family had relatives and friends in Middleton. In addition to his growing political connections in eastern Long Island, Floyd was no doubt also influenced by the attitudes of his Connecticut friends and relatives. He was active in the town affairs of the town of Brookhaven, and was 3 times elected a trustee of the town and served as an officer in the local militia. In 1769, he was elected to the Provincial Assembly. This permitted him to become acquainted with political figures from other parts of the colony. As a result, when Suffolk County chose delegates to the First Continental Congress in 74, Floyd was an obvious selection. By early 75, issues between the colonies and the mother country obviously warmed considerably, resulting in the Battle of Lexington and Concord, and the colony of New York elected 10 men to attend the Second Continental Congress, but because of other commitments, either local or colony, only 4 of them, including William Floyd, attended and presented their credentials. He probably arrived in Philadelphia in May on the 10th, and he soon found himself on several committees, spending a large part of his time on inspection tours, visits, and meeting with other delegations, as well as being locally nominated colonel of the Western Regiment of Suffolk County. So, Floyd shared his time between his military duties and his congressional duties. By the now famous summer of 76, New York had not instructed its delegation to vote for any matter such as independence, so Floyd and his fellow New York delegates had their hands tied until the New York Provincial Congress would come to some conclusion. While the Continental Congress voted for Richard Henry Lee's resolution regarding independence on the 2nd of July, and spent 2 days adjusting the language in the committee's declaration of the matter, the New York delegation had to remain silent. Finally, on the 9th of July, the New York Provincial Congress voted to approve independence and forwarded that information to their delegation in Philadelphia, which arrived on the 11th of July. Now, hardly was the ink dry from the delegates' signing of the declaration when the British landed on Long Island and defeated Washington in a battle there in August. The British, within the next couple months, overran the entire island, including Floyd's home. Mrs. Floyd had time to bury the family's silver before she and their 3 children, with a few friends and neighbors, fled across the island to its north shore and sailed to shelter with friends in Middleton. William Floyd continued to faithfully serve both his military obligations, for which he was eventually raised in the militia to Major General, and to his duty as a delegate to the Continental Congress. He was a member of the Clothing Committee and served additionally on several other committees from time to time. He served a short term in the New York State Senate, but in January of '79 was sent back to the Continental Congress. Floyd returned to his Long Island estate at the end of the war in '83 to find it ransacked, the fields desolated, the trees uprooted, the fences burned, his livestock lost, and his house unlivable. There's a few gaps in the rest of his life, but we know that in 1794 he moved to a large tract of land in Oneida County in the frontier area of New York, and lived there until his death today, August 4th. He's soon buried in a Presbyterian cemetery near his home, and the inscription on his grave includes an excerpt from the Declaration of Independence saying, "We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. William Floyd, member of the Continental Congress, signer of the Declaration of Independence." There are now only 3 signers left, though it'll be just shy of 5 years before another is to pass away. On the 10th of August, Missouri officially completes its long road to statehood and is admitted as the 24th U.S. state when President James Monroe signs a proclamation approving its entry to the Union. Done at the city of Washington, the 10th day of August, Anno Domini 1821, and of the independence of the said United States of America, the 46th. The state capital is located in St. Charles for now, until a permanent location is designated, and I haven't read state constitutions here in a while, but I always check them out. So when I saw that Missouri got a new constitution in 1875, I figured it would be interesting to check out some of the aspects of this original state constitution. The Constitution makes specific provisions for the treatment of slaves, saying, Section 27. In prosecutions for crimes, slaves shall not be deprived of an impartial trial by jury, and a slave convicted of a capital offense shall suffer the same degree of punishment and no other that would be inflicted on a free white person for a like offense. And the courts of justice before whom the slave shall be tried shall assign them counsel for their defense. Section 28. Any person who shall maliciously deprive of life or dismember a slave shall suffer such punishment as would be inflicted for the like offense if it were committed on a free white person. In Article 13, the Constitution goes on to provide a Declaration of Rights, and with stark clarity, the third enumerated right of the people is to bear arms and protest. It reads, that the people have the right peaceably to assemble for their common good, and to apply to those vested with the powers of government for redress of grievances, by petition or remonstrance, and that their right to bear arms in defense of themselves and of the state cannot be questioned. So, with Missouri finally in the Union, the Flag Act stipulates that the flag of the United States be updated on July 4th next, and the nation will get its 24th star. On September 3rd, a hurricane strikes New York City and creates a 13-foot storm surge. There isn't any incredible damage to speak of, but it's noteworthy that the eye of this storm passes directly over Manhattan, and to this day, this is the only recorded case of that happening. Alright, now in our final story of the year, we'll look into what we now call the Santa Fe Trail. And to do that, we'll first look into a man by the name of William Becknell, a trader and trapper who contracted heavy debts from his various business ventures and apparently in the hope of finding relief, organized an expedition for the purpose of trading for horses, mules, and catching wild animals of every description in the southern Rockies over this summer. He first set out on this difficult journey along the Arkansas River and into what is now southeastern Colorado, and there, Becknell and his party turned south through the Raton Pass. As was feared, they soon encounter a troop of Mexican soldiers. However, the soldiers inform the party of the overthrow of Spanish rule and that Santa Fe, which has been kept isolated, will now welcome their trade. So all that catches us up to today, where Becknell arrives in Santa Fe in mid-November, 2 weeks ahead of the next nearest party. Becknell thus gains today the distinction of having opened the Santa Fe trade and quickly is able to turn out his goods for a tidy profit and leaves most of his companions to trap and trade while he heads back to get more goods. His return trip is what's most notable about this journey, however, as he experiments with a different route to avoid the difficult Raton Pass in anticipation of returning with multiple wagons loaded up with heavy goods. Now, it's not really exclusively about easy terrain. Water needs to be present along routes used for travel as well for the animals and men that are transporting goods. This is why many routes follow rivers, even if small, or connect the dots between reliable bodies of water. His journey mostly takes place in January of next year, so we'll have to wait to cover him making it to the other side. But while it's not completely unblazed, as some migratory Indians use portions of the trail, the entire 800-mile journey that Becknell is about to set out on changes the game for trade in the South. And even beyond that, this Santa Fe Trail has historical implications for our story, so make sure that you check back tomorrow as we cover more about that. Now, I've done a lot of research for this week's episodes, but regardless, I've still ended up with relatively shorter episodes. Hopefully, y'all don't mind. But sound off in the comments and tell me what you're thinking, or get in contact on X or by sending an email to 250yearsofUSA@gmail.com. As the election nears, we will be diving deep onto the mechanics of all of that. And as I hinted at, we do have some pretty cool stories coming up this week. It's just that not too much is going on all at the same time. We're still kind of in that era of good feelings where peace abounds. And at least for now, there's not too much division in the political landscape. I guess that's probably reductive. There's not that much division that at least comes to a head. There are, in the background, some things going on, especially regional differences that will obviously play a part in future stories. But as is the nature of this show, we largely are going to consider those things as they become relevant. Anyway, that is the show for today. Next time, in 1822, we will wrap up Becknell's journey on the Santa Fe Trail, look at a couple stories regarding slavery, and tell the story of the USS Alligator. Until next time, this has been our story, 250 years of the United States of America, and as always, thanks for listening.